Welcome, gamers, to Basement Arcade Pause Menu, the show where we hit pause, sit back, and just chill. I am Ben Magnet, and today on the show, I have another amazing guest. He is another third of the Gamers Wing podcast, and no, it is not Donnie G Retro, although we do love him having here on the show. He is a gentleman who is a professor of a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. He also has a never once stand on Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Mr. Retro Game Brews, aka Ryan Payne. Ryan, how are you today? Good morning.
Good morning, and I am super excited to be on the show here today. So thank you so much for having me, and especially talking about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. So thank you so much.
You kidding? I was absolutely stoked when you agreed to come on the show because I got Donnie G on. I had him on twice, actually. If you go, audio listeners or even listeners of the show, if you look back on the shows I had where I've had guests on here, Donnie G has been my guest twice. It was really cool to meet him at Portland Retro Gaming Expo, even though I only got to say hi to him, give him a quick hug and a quick picture for like 2 seconds. And now I have another member of the Gamers Week podcast on. I kind of feel like Thanos because I'm slowly but surely getting people from not Retro Gamers, your Retro Gamers, from Gamers Week on here. So now the only one I'm missing in my Gamer Infinity Power Glove is Blue Williams. So look for that DM soon, Blue. Just let you know.
It's coming.
Blue, if you're listening, just your turn shall come. Of course, if you want to come on. If you don't want to, I will not be offended.
And it's Blue. She's somebody who doesn't show up on a lot of podcasts, but super excited to kind of have her on our show. She comes with a lot of really great information as well as insight. So for sure, Blue's awesome.
We'll gush a little about Gamers Week. I know I've gushed about it with Ryan, but today not with Ryan, with Donnie. My God, what is wrong with me? I did the same thing with Donnie. I accidentally called him Ryan. He's like, I'm Donnie. I was like, and that was live with a hot mic. And I'm pretty sure that made it into the episode too. So, Ryan, I'm so sorry. Anyways, but let's talk about before we talk about our topic, which our topic today is video game history. Before we get into that, I would like to know a little bit more about you. Obviously, you are 1/3 of the Gamers Week podcast, which I've said many times in the past 30 or 2 minutes. But how did you get into video games? Like, what was the catalyst that got you into the medium?
So as a kid, I remember specifically the first video game experience I ever had was going over to my grandparents' house. They had an Atari 2600, and specifically I remember playing Keystone Capers and just falling in love with it. The sounds, the visuals, and it's a really, really fantastic game made by Gary Kitchener, which I've had the pleasure of actually interacting with on Twitter to kind of let him know, like, hey, by the way, you're one of my favorite game developers of all time, because that's my first experience into video games. And then closer to the 90s, Christmas came along and got that first present to open up, big box, and it ended up being an action set with the NES in it, and absolutely fell in love with the NES. And the interesting part was try to get my dad into playing, and come to find out he had actually decided that he was going to play Mario one day, and it was probably 10 at night that he started playing it, and then all of a sudden realized that the sun was coming up and swore off video games from there on out. He was like, this stuff is too addicting. I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Are you kidding? Playing until the sun comes up is a grand tradition. It is a rite of passage. I told you what my work schedule is and how I've come home. I cannot tell you how many times I've come home from my regular 9-to-5 job, and I've sat down. I started playing video games. Now I come home. I normally walk through my door around 1 a.m. in the morning, and especially on a Friday night, because thankfully I had the weekends off. I cannot tell you how many times where I've literally played a game, especially a game I've been wanting to play from like 1:30, 2 a.m. in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, and I could see the sun. That to me is a rite of passage.
Agreed.
For any video gamer. Please tell me that when your dad swore off video games, he came back to video games. He
no, and I think it had a lot to do with the day after playing that session of Super Mario Brothers. I think he had a pretty rough day at work, so for him that was it was it was kind of compounded as a result of having a little bit too much fun with Super Mario Brothers, but.
Man, that's a bummer.
Mhm.
I know I've told this story on the podcast before, but I remember when I got my NES, I asked my dad, my dad came up to me for before the holidays. He asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I
Mhm.
said Super Nintendo. Unfortunately, he just heard Nintendo, and he went to his sister, my aunt, and she had an NES that she wasn't using, so and a bunch of games. So she gave it to him, and I opened it up on Christmas morning. I'm visiting my mom's side of the family in Montana, and I see this gray looking toaster thing, and I'm all like, "This isn't what I wanted," but I didn't want to seem ungrateful
Sure, sure.
because my grandparents did not take kindly to ungrateful kids, especially on Christmas of all
Indeed,
things.
indeed.
So my dad was like, "This is what you want, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." But the best thing about it is like a few minutes later, we hooked it up to my grandmother's TV, and my 60, 70 some year old grandfather, all of my older cousins who were well into like their 40s, maybe 50s. My brother and I, we were very young at the time.
Right.
They're taking turns playing duck hunt. Because it's Montana, it's a big
Oh,
hunting
of
community.
course.
They're playing duck hunt, and I'm just my brother and I are sitting there like, can we get a turn? And they're like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
eventually, eventually. And then we had because we had like the Duck Hunt Super Mario combo cart. We had Super Mario Brothers 3. We had ice hockey, which is one of my favorite sports games of
Oh,
all
yeah.
time. I absolutely love playing that game. We had like a decent menagerie of titles, a few LGN titles, a few game show games, and it was definitely a fan. It was I wouldn't trade that Christmas for all the Super Nintendos in the world.
Well put.
All right, so your dad got an NES, and you've been playing video games since the Atari 2600, and you on Gamers Week podcast, you have a segment during the end of your show where it's Professor Ryan's Gaming History 101. I absolutely love that segment of the podcast. What got you into gaming history?
So I've always been somebody who's been fascinated with history. So growing up, that was one of my favorite classes in school was history itself. And one of the things that got me into video game history was a YouTuber by the name of Norm Caruso, who goes by Gaming Historian, and loved his segments. They were really well produced, really well researched and thought out. There you go.
Audio listeners, I'm pulling up a gaming historian journal that I bought when I met him at Portland Retro Gaming Expo.
Guy's fantastic and just extremely intelligent and really tackles all that there is to know. So there was part of that. I knew I couldn't quite reproduce what he does, but I thought to myself, well, there's a lot of other stories that don't quite have an hour or 30 minutes worth of content, but still could be something that we could discuss on a weekly basis. And I just tried it out for the first time when we were starting the podcast last year,
Mhm.
and people really were receptive to it. So I was like, all right, let's see if we can make this a regular thing. And actually, Donnie had reached out to me and said, hey, are you comfortable if I add a segment every once in a while during that time frame? And so what he does is the retro rewind, in which he takes a month of a particular year and grabs a whole bunch of magazines to that. And I really, really enjoy that segment as well, because it's almost like it's a blast from the past. So a mixture between those two, I think, really makes for a fun segment in the podcast. And at the end of the day, it's fun for me to research this stuff just to find new and interesting bits of stories behind the gaming history. Because often, you see things that are just facts that, oh, this happened and this happened. But as you start to do more and more research into these particular topics, you start to really see the full story. And that's exactly what I'm trying to portray when we do these, Professor Rybred's Gaming History 101 is a chance to kind of retell some of those stories that people may not have heard.
No, you and I share a kinship in the fact that it was the gaming historian's videos. I don't know how exactly I found his videos when I was just like, it was just one of those days I'm just going through YouTube,
Yep.
and all of a sudden I see the gaming historian. And I go, huh. And then I start watching his videos. Eventually I start binging his videos. And all of a sudden, because I was also a big history buff when I was in high school.
Mhm.
I was that weird kid who loved his history class. All my friends were like, oh, history is so boring, it's so lame. I'm like, no, but we get to learn about what happened in the past.
Right.
We get to learn about Sorry, I'm making sure my cat doesn't knock over my my wake up juice.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we get to learn about what happened back in the. We get to learn. I mean, not just what happened today, but the events that led up to it.
Mhm.
I love learning about, like, say, medieval
Oh
history,
yeah.
early 19th century history, because I just, and even though that a lot of the records back then were kind of like, were still wonky, it was still fun to learn. To me, especially, I'm a huge fantasy nerd, but even going to video games and just especially learning about stuff that happened in the early 80s. Of course, I mean, we'll get into it more, but just diving into the rabbit hole that is video game history is like, all this stuff is very interesting because it's not just about the programmers, it's about the people working in marketing. It's about the gamers who experience this, like what was going through their minds about
Right.
when they were playing this. And it was just so interesting to me. And I just fell deeper and deeper into it, that even this year for Christmas, my girlfriend got me like 3 different books on video game history.
Nice. I love that.
And
I'm also a huge video game book, history book buff as well. So, oh man, the more I can get my hands on. In fact, one of my favorite books is Once Upon Atari. That's the word. Written by Howard Scott Warshaw, and he just goes through his entire experience of, working at Atari and going through the entire process of creating ET for the Atari 2600, as well as Yar's Revenge. And just the best part I like about that is the way that Howard writes. It's very conversational, so you feel like you're there rather than just, like I said before, just listing facts. He's talking about his emotional experiences, where his head was at when he was creating X, Y, and Z. And it's an amazing read, and it's fairly short, which is great as well. So just getting a chance to get inside his head. And he's also one of my favorite developers of our time, all time. Yar's Revenge is fantastic game. There's not a lot of games on the Atari 2600 that can keep your attention for more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
Yar's is definitely one of those that can.
Oh no, Howard Scott Warshaw is an absolute blast, because you interviewed on your show. I was grateful enough to talk to him and interview him on this show as well. And when I got to meet him at because I met him at PRGE, got him to sign his book, because you're absolutely right. I was reading his book on my flight to Portland. It's very conversational, and just talking to him about his mindset for ET, and even watching the Game Over Atari, like Game Over documentary, was fascinating. Because growing up, I definitely fell into the trap, or the internet trap, of ET is the worst video game of all time. It's the thing that caused the video game crash. But watching that documentary definitely changed my mind about it, about how ET isn't the worst game of all time. Because if you think about it, ET is a technological feat for 1982. This man was given 5 weeks to fully script, or to fully develop, create, design, script a game. And yes, this is back in 1982. Computers were very, like, my iPhone can eat an Atari cartridge for breakfast. with all the stuff I can do on this sucker, it could eat an Atari cartridge for breakfast. My laptop, which I'm recording this on, could probably eat in like 3 2600s like a salad and not bat an eye. But back then, it was just amazing how one person made an entire video game.
Right.
And for the longest time, we've been unapologetic, or the internet, or a lot of people on the internet have been unapologetically bashing this poor man. But he's been taking it in stride, and thankfully, thankfully now the script has changed a little bit, where we've taken a step back and it's like, you know what, maybe ET isn't the worst game of all time. My vote is the Pac-Man port, for the Pac-Man Atari 2600 port. That's the worst video game of all time, in my humble opinion. But you're absolutely.
Yeah, what I like about Howard, though, is that he really embraces this idea that it's the worst video game of all time, because Yar's is often, and he said this to us, is Yar's is often considered one of the best games of all time. And he also has programmed one of the worst games of all time. So he feels as though that is an accomplishment to have that kind of range. As far as a developer is concerned. I think that's great. That his mentality is so incredibly healthy with that. I think your average person wouldn't be able to handle the level of, not necessarily hate, but just criticism of that experience. And a lot of it just comes from the fact that most people, like you said, don't really know that this was programmed in 5 weeks. And given, I mean, really, it was probably a little less than 5 weeks, because there was a point in which he was just coming up with the concept and then had to present that to Steven Spielberg. And so, my goodness, a story to tell, and
Mhm.
just having a guy being so healthy about that entire mindset when it comes to
Yeah.
it moving forward. So
Oh yeah,
super
definitely.
super awesome guy.
Oh yeah, he's an absolute joy to talk to. I absolutely love talking with him. The fact that, to me, I was just blown away because I emailed him, because I emailed him, and I was like I'm a very small show. Base Arcade Pods Mini is a very small show on the internet, and the fact that he took the time to talk to someone like me, and because we talked for a good half an hour about him working on games and how his reaction to the essentially the ET hate over the years. He was an absolute joy to talk to, that I need to have on the show again. And also, you're absolutely right. Yar's Revenge is an amazing game. I found, like, unfortunately, I do not have a 2600 that I could go to my TV and plug in. I do have a cartridge though, and I did get him to sign both that and my
Awesome.
ET cartridge, so
Love
that
it.
was nice. And when I actually got to play Yar's Revenge at Portland this past PRGE, Yars is amazing.
Oh my God.
I
Fantastic game.
I don't want to give too much crap to Atari games, because, once again, I call the age of Atari like the primordial age of video
Sure.
games, because no one really knew what they were doing back then. They were just
Mhm.
like, "Hey, we think this is fun." There are no set rules. There is no, we can't really compare it to Mario, to Sonic, to Crash Bandicoot, or anything like that, because that's way further down the line.
Mhm.
But Yard's Revenge was definitely interesting. It was definitely had this, like, I really wanted to keep playing it, but also at the same time, I have a bunch of different other consoles around me. It's like, ooh, I
Sure.
want to go look at the. But yeah, so both of us are big history buffs. Both of us love reading video game books. What's your, besides Once Upon a Atari? Do you have any other video game history books that are your absolute favorite, or is there just like a bunch of menagerie that you could just like just throw a dart and it's like, yeah, that's my favorite at this moment in time?
Right now, I'm reading the story of Cubert.
Oh,
I forgot the name of the guy. Which is embarrassing considering how much I I pride myself on my knowledge of video game history. But it's also a really interesting story, kind of his take on the progression of it, and how exactly he was involved from point A to point B. So that's something I've started. And in fact, one of the things that I would love to do is to have him on Gamers Week in the future as well. That's another part of it. When we invite a guest onto the show, I really, really want to be able to read, at least if they have obviously a book out there. I
mhm.
would love to read it, so that at the end of the day, I can speak with some semblance of being informed when it comes to their story. Because I think one of the things, because really, Howard was our first like big interview with somebody of video game history, and by
Oh
reading
yeah.
that book, he said to me, he goes, I can tell when someone reads the book and when they don't. I was like, oh, okay, beautiful. Glad I passed the test. So that's been like a point for us. And so, like, we had Rebecca Heineman on the show, so I did a
Oh yeah.
whole bunch of research about her and her experience with Interplay. So that has really driven my book reading process. Is there somebody that I would want to have on the show? Whether or not they're going to come on and agree to, that's irrelevant. I want to find books that of people that I would love to talk to.
Hmm.
And so that really decides it. But like I said, right now it's the kind of the story behind Cubert, and
Right.
it's really, really good. I'm about halfway through it, so looking forward to kind of figuring out what the end of that is. But I actually met him at Southern Fried Gaming Expo, and purchased the book there, and said, hey, well, would you be interested in being on the show? And he says, yeah, sure. Just give me uh, give me your contact info. And one of the things I said is, I'd really like to read the book first. And he goes, good, I like that. So hopefully someday we'll have him on the show.
No, that's awesome. And I completely forgot that you had Rebecca Heineman on the show, because
Mhm.
I wasn't familiar with her until a little show on Netflix came out called High Score. And learning her story, once again, fascinating me, because she's the first like official video game champion of the world.
Right. First esports champion that
Yeah,
existed. Yeah.
she's the first one.
Mhm.
And she won it in Space Invaders. And I didn't even know they had video game competitions back then. I was a I may be a child of the 90s, but I was born in 1990. So when Nintendo was doing the World Championships, I was unfortunately way too young, and I did not have any video games in my house to practice for it.
Sure.
But the fact that she was the first champion, and the fact that you interviewed here, and I absolutely adore your episode. she's definitely someone that I would love to have on my show as well.
Mhm.
Um, but the fact, just like hearing her story about going to New York, about playing Space Invaders, about being really good at Space Invaders, because I like a good, I'm a not that good Deep Space Invader, but I like playing Space Invaders. I can understand. I enjoy it. I also have a Atari 2600 card because this is like to me this is a historical thing and that I want to hold on to.
Right.
If I ever get like an Atari clone console, like yeah, I'd love to pop that sucker in and give it a go. But just hearing that she was the very first one, and the fact that the very first ever video game champion is a woman, it's like, ooh, that's awesome.
And you know what's interesting about her is that, the transition from being a video game champion and then eventually being a leader within the video game industry,
Mhm.
founding Interplay and being involved in a lot of different video game ports. She's actually renowned for her ability to port a game from one console to another. And then just her struggle as far as her transition was concerned
Mhm.
was really, really interesting as well. And now, again, she's in the public space and out there and expressing her views, and super glad to have her voice be out there as well. Because again, she has such an interesting history and just an interesting past. Uh,
Mhm.
Jealous, absolutely, 100%.
You kidding me? The fact that I found out that there was such a thing as video game championships when I was a kid, I was like, I could do that. Now I'm looking at how like esports is today. I'm like,
Right.
I don't think I can do that. Like,
And you know what was interesting about her is that I think that she had this idea that, you know what, I'm pretty good at this, let me give it a try. And then when she went to compete, not realizing how amazingly good she was at Space Invaders, and when she finished her first round, she saw that she was like on the top of the leaderboard, and she was like, huh, how about that, very
uh,
nonchalant, not very like humble, and that like, oh,
yeah.
okay, that
I
works.
I think that's one of the things that really draws me to like want to learn more about her story is how humble she is. She's
Mhm.
not like, yeah, she's not. I mean, granted, back in the 80s, there were people who were cocky about this medium that was gaining traction. It's like, oh yeah, I'm the best at X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And she's just like, huh, how about that?
Right.
All right.
Totally different mentality than
De-
you'll probably see today too from esports.
oh yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. I want to say like the best compliment that my nephew has ever given me, but he never said this to my face. He only mentioned it to his mom, my stepsister, was that when my nephew was younger, he said he thought that I would be able to win at the Fortnite World Championships.
Nice.
And this was a time where I was not playing Fortnite, where I was very much against Fortnite. My tune has changed. I enjoy playing the game. It's very fun, actually. And she texted me that she's like, "Hey, your nephew thinks you can win in the Fortnite World Championships." I'm like, if I played, I'll take that. I'm
That's
not that
awesome.
good."
But you got your own fan base, which is awesome.
I
That's
I
fantastic.
I do have a little. I do have well, his interest shifted from video games to music now, but he still enjoys games, which makes me happy.
Fantastic.
All right, so going back to like the main topic of video game history,
Mhm.
out of curiosity, what is your favorite era of video game history to study and to learn about?
That's a tough one. It's probably a tie between the 80s and the 70s. The 70s in particular because it's just so brand new. And to your point, which you kind of talked about the Atari being kind of the Wild West, where no, there are no rules. It's pretty much people are making it up as they go. That's the interesting part to me because there are so many great discoveries as a result of that. I mean, if you look at Jerry Lawson when it came
Oh yeah.
to the Fairchild Channel F, and really he was the first one to put a series of chips into the Fairchild Channel F, and really was scoping those out in the early 70s to create this
Mhm.
product. And at the time, he ended up purchasing them from Atari for because they were making or using those chips for the Pong consoles. And oh, I take it back. It was the other way around. So Atari approached him because he was working at Fairchild Semiconductor, and he saw that this was being used in the video game space. So he was like, we can do this too. And it was it's just an interesting spot to that. Now, fast forward to the 80s, where all of a sudden gaming is a much more viable industry. In the early 80s, there's this explosion of all of these different consoles that are coming out, all of these different PCs that are available from a gaming space, and just different genres of games are being created out of nowhere. You know, the Maze Chase game with Pac-Man, you're looking at RPGs with like a Calibeth, and eventually what's turned into Ultima. You're looking at even just Dragon Quest becoming the JRPG moving forward. So it's an amazing time to see all of these small genres beginning to gain traction, gain space, and looking at the fact that we still play a vast majority of these games still today, or at least games influenced by those genres today, is really, really exciting. And it's almost like, as far as movies were concerned, like the 60s and 70s of the cinema industry, how that transitioned from being very dialogue driven to more action, more storytelling. It's an interesting kind of tale to tell as you move forward into the gaming space. So it's a tough say between 70s and 80s. I don't get me wrong, I do love the 90s and the early 2000s, because it's like turning it up to 11 when it comes to all of the things that we discussed prior to that, but it's still the 70s and 80s influenced those times as well. So very, very interesting to me.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a dark period of history, but I absolutely love learning about the crash of 82 here.
Oh, yeah.
And even when I found out, because I write for a magazine that's based out of in the UK. And when I remember I was talking to one of the writers, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we didn't have that." I'm like, "Wait, what?" Because us being here in the United States, there are times where we mention big events and we think that, oh, it's worldwide. We fail to mention that this only happened in North America. Whereas if you look outside of North America, especially in Europe, in Asia, South America, there was no such thing as a gaming crash of 1982 or 1983. Video games were still very much popular and they were still being made. It's just, unfortunately, here in America and I believe Canada as well, we just screwed up so bad that the market dipped.
Right.
And finding out that the rest of the world was fine, it was us that had the problem. It's like, that makes so much sense if you think about it.
Indeed.
But yeah, to your point, learning about the 80s, it truly is fantastic. Like learning about how Tennis for Two, then you go to Space War, and then you go into Pong, and then you go into Atari. And even for the longest time, I thought the Atari 2600 was the very first at-home video game console. True, you had the Magnavox, but that was just so old, so primordial, that the Magnavox Odyssey was like, the fact that you had to put clings on your television screen to properly play games was like, wow, that is, I mean, they were trying. They were honest to God trying. And then when I find out about the Fairchild Channel F, I'm like, what is this console I've never heard about? And once again, I know I mentioned PRG before, but thanks to PRGE, I actually got to play a Fairchild for the very first time.
And that controller is wild.
Oh my God, it
knob
is.
on the top, and then you can press down on it. It's that's revolutionary to me, is having I think it's 8-way directional controls. Actually 9 if you talk about the fact that you can pop the top of it. And at the end of the day, the fact that didn't stick, I think was a part of it was because obviously the Channel F wasn't popular, but the other part I think being that it was probably expensive to develop, but eventually got back into that whole idea of having an 8-way controller. But the fact that it was available in 76 makes you wonder, how come nobody actually took this idea and ran with it? But
I know, right? Is I mean, even when I was playing the Fairchild Channel F, I was very much confused because I was just trying. I can't remember exactly what game I was trying to play, but it was just like, I want to say primitive, but I don't want to say primitive in a bad way. It was just so different. It was just so, because with Atari, you know what an Atari is. Like you plop that sucker in, you have a joystick, you have one button. It should be easy to figure out how to do X, Y, and Z. But with the Fairchild, I'm just like holding this controller and holding the knob on top. I was like, this feels so weird. But at the same time, I'm just relevating in the history. Is like this is the first cartridge based system. We wouldn't have Nintendo cartridges, or we wouldn't have Sega Genesis cartridges, even Atari cartridges without this one thing.
Right.
And I'm so glad that nowadays it's getting more and more recognition. I could not tell you how happy I was as a history nerd to open up Google one day and to see that doodle of Jerry Lawson.
Right.
I was like, thank God he's getting recognized. He got recognized in high score, and now more and more people are mentioning his name. And to me, that just means like this is a big person that should be immortalized in essentially a video game Hall of Fame because of what he did.
And I've had people ask me, like, who would you want to interview that's kind of no longer with us? And Jerry is the top of my list. I would love to have heard him. I've actually watched quite a few interviews with him from the past, and the stories he tells are not only intriguing but really, really funny as well. He tells a story about the fact that his kids were basically his game testers, and they always figured out the craziest bugs in the games that he was playing. So there was one that was similar to Pac-Man, and they figured out that if you if you go into a certain section of the board, none of the enemies will touch you, and that you can kind of break the third wall, if you will, and move into certain unterritorial space when it comes to the game. So he was like, okay, my kids broke the game. Back to the drawing board, guys, on this one.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Right. So his stories are fantastic. And I think he spent the last years of his life really focusing on trying to help engineers of color kind of get access to additional funding and better education. So that was also a really cool thing that he ended up doing. But definitely would love to interview that guy.
No, he's also on the top of my list. Like the second I found out his name, in that same like 5-minute span, I also found out that he sadly passed away, and I'm like, damn it! I wanted to talk to him.
We need more Jerry Lawson, is that right?
Yeah, we do. We definitely do. So obviously you have a segment on your show called Professor Brybread's Gaming History 101. Right. And in that, it's about like 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes sometimes where you pick one thing of video game history and you just go at it. And you have some amazing things you talked about. Too many that I'm trying to pick one. And unfortunately, my brain is just going error 404, cannot find. But when you were researching this for your show, can you think of the craziest story that you've ever found, and you're like, no way, that's how we got insert name here?
That one's a tough one, just because I've done so many of it. Because if you think about it, I've done probably 50 or so right now. So there's a lot of history to pull on that. I think one of the more interesting things where I was researching it, going through and just trying to imagine what was happening, was the lawsuits not a lawsuit, but the congressional hearings between Nintendo versus Sega, and the amount of like petty back and forth that they were going through, right? Where, Nintendo was accusing Sega of a multitude of things, including corrupting our youth. And Sega would come back and say, no, Nintendo's doing that too. And just this amazing tit for tat that was happening between those two companies, and realistically kind of dragging each other through the mud, and probably led to, the console wars that we all engaged in back in the day. This definitely added fuel to that fire. So, there's a part of that aside, collateral of that story is that we all consumed some of this back in the day and went, well, that's why I love Nintendo. This is why I love Sega. And so just the amount of ire that was brought out during those, and certain things that were said at the time that ended up, fast forwarding into the future being different. For example, Howard Lincoln, who was the head of the legal team for Nintendo of America, said, and I quote, Night Trap will never be on a Nintendo console.
I was hoping if I was this close. I'm like, if he doesn't mention Howard Lincoln talking about Night Trap, I'm not going to be trying to one up you, but I want to mention that because I cannot tell you, Ryan, how hard I laughed.
Yep.
When I saw Night Trap on LRG's website for the Nintendo Switch. Because you mentioned how the 70s and 80s are your favorite era. My personal favorite is learning about the console war between Sega and Nintendo. I remember going to the store. I bought Blake J. Harris's book, Console War.
Mhm.
I read that sucker cover to cover. I absolutely adored it. I think that's what helped me solidify my absolute love of learning about video game history. And because I was alive during this era. I was part. I tell my friends and I tell other guests that I am a veteran of the old console wars. I ranked up. I was on Team Sega for the longest time. I
I was on Team Nintendo, so
okay. If
glad
we
we
were
can
this
have an amicable conversation
if
nowadays.
you well, if you and I were in the same room, I would be shaking your hand and saying, "Sir, congratulations on winning a petty little playground war." And I say that in I say that in the nicest thing possible because I'm wearing a classically trained shirt. I will not lie. I love Nintendo.
Oh yeah.
I mean, Sega was the reason I got into video games. The very first video game I ever played was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic CD is my favorite video game of all time. But I will not lie. I love Nintendo.
Mhm.
I can't.
I'm in the same boat where as an adult, I'd actually never really gotten a chance to play Sega back in the day, and as an adult, started getting into collecting for it. And there are so many games that I'm upset about that I missed from a child's perspective, being able to
Me
play
too.
those games for the first time. So being it as an adult, it's great to go back. But again, having that mysticism, that wonder of being a child and playing them for the first time, I think would have definitely given me a reason to get more into Sega back when I was a kid.
hmm Yeah, I cannot tell you how happy I was when the minis first started rolling out. Like the NES Mini, I waited in line. I drove back at when the Super Nintendo Mini was released. I was working even worse shift. I was working from 9 p.m. to 5:30 a.m.
Ooh.
Yeah, that was worse. I Ryan, when I got off work that day, when that console dropped, I drove from my job to a local Target, stood in line for like 2.5 hours, waiting for they had the manager of the store showed up, handed us tickets to make sure that we got that console. I was like number 50 out of 154. So I got myself a Super Nintendo. I drove back home, plugged it in, didn't go to bed until 11 a.m., which for me was really late. And I was like, "Oh, finally, I got Super Nintendo." And then I got the Sega Genesis for Christmas that year. I was like, I I was 30 years old when I got that stupid thing. I was at 30 or 29 years. No, I was 29 when I got it. And I opened it, I ripped it open Christmas and I yelled, Sega! As my voice breaks right there. But I was like, Sega! I was just like super happy that I finally got a Genesis because I never had a Genesis growing up. My first ever video game console was a PlayStation. And the only way I was able to play a bunch of Sega games is because they ported them from the Genesis to the PC.
Right.
And my family had a Windows 95, so they saw Sonic CD. They had no idea what they bought me. They just bought me a Sonic game because they knew I love Sonic.
Awesome, though. That's great that you got a chance to experience that, even though you maybe didn't have the console on hand. And especially PCs, I think that's something that uh, is often not talked about as much in our retro gaming circles, is this access to old big box PC games and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. But man, I've got a lot of really fantastic memories about having games that were ported over to the PC to play, and even games that weren't available on any console at the time, like Doom, for example.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I loved my PC. I spent a lot of time. My father was somebody who purchased a PC when we were younger. I think it was an Apple II.
Mm.
No, I take it back. I think it was a Tandy TRS 80 that he had gotten from a friend, and then we got the Apple II later on. But I remember specifically plugging in a Wheel of Fortune game and playing that with my mom on like a 5 1/4 floppy as
Wow.
well.
I will say I am part of that generation, or I'm one of those '90s kids who does still remember floppy disks.
There you go.
I may be a millennial, but I'm an elder millennial, so I know something. You say floppy disk, I'm like, I know that. All these youngins say that's the save icon. It's like, no, that's a floppy disk, damn it.
Oh man. And my dad was kind of a collector of that stuff. So in our computer room, he had like memory storage from over the years. And one of the things he had was a plate that was probably 12 to 16 inches across, and that
Mhm.
was uh, 70s, early 80s technology for storage media that you would.
Oh wow.
It had a handle on it. It was so big. This thing was a huge hunk of plastic, round and shaped like a vinyl record, and with
Mhm.
a big handle on top. and it stored, I think, less than a megabyte worth of space on this thing. Just
A
very,
megabyte?
yeah. So
Oh my god.
yeah. So yeah, just an interesting thing. And then he had, of course, like laser discs up there, which was the big
Mhm.
thing, right? All of a sudden, you've got
Right,
like a
right.
gig worth of space you can put on this thing, and it was just very interesting, kind of roll back to history growing up. Because maybe that's now that I think of it, maybe my dad had some influence on that whole history thing. Because I remember specifically one day asking what that was, and kind of ran me through it. And at the time, I didn't really understand what that meant, and now as an adult, it's just an interesting look back into kind of where we came from.
Yeah. Another one of the reasons why I also love learning and studying and reading about video game history is just how far technology has come in the span of, well, Atari just celebrated the 50th anniversary, so now 50 years.
Right.
You look at Atari 2600, thankfully a system that you can still find today, a system that still works, because eventually these games will die, and it's sad, but steps are being made to create to still make these playable. Like you have the Atari 50, you have a bunch of other video game compilations out there. You have the Atari flashbacks and everything,
Hmm.
which still plays, I mean, a decent chunk of these games. But just seeing how you go from those, I don't know, 2 5-bit games, maybe 3-bit games, really,
Right.
just seeing the jump from an Atari 2600 to a Nintendo Entertainment System blows me away.
Yeah. Huge
And
jump.
then then you go from 16 to from 8 to 16, 16 to 32, 32 to 64. And now if you look at today, like seeing video games today, especially with what the PlayStation 5 can do, what the Xbox Series X can do, even what the Nintendo Switch can do,
Mhm.
and you put that side by side with these old primordial machines, and you're like, my God, how far we've come in such
Mhm.
a short amount of time. Because when we talk about video game history, we're not talking things in like hundreds,
Oh
thousands of
yeah.
years
Right.
ago. This all this stuff is very recent. It's very modern. And the fact that there's just still so much compacted in a small amount of time still blows me away. You were talking about how in a bunch of retro spaces, PC games aren't really mentioned. And I think, and now that I think about it, you're 100% right. Because I never had a console. I never had a Nintendo. I mean, eventually I did, but when I was very young, like say kindergarten, first grade, my video game machine was a Windows 95 computer. My dad came home with a copy of Doom that he borrowed from one of his friends. And next thing I know, little first grader me, kindergarten younger brother, were playing Doom, and my mom and my dad are standing there laughing and watching us play.
It's funny. I When we got Doom, it was from my cousin, and we had to like play it when no one was around because we didn't want to get in trouble.
We
Because it was
asked,
so
and
violent.
I tell my friends that somehow my parents, the stars were cosmically aligned, and they're like, "Oh, this game has blood and guts. Sure, the boys are gonna love this."
I love it.
I mean,
Absolutely love that.
my dad's a well, he's retired now. He was a peace officer, and he did send us down and say, "You know this is fake, right?" You're like, "Oh yeah, of course it's fake. We know this
Right.
is fake." He's like, "You know not to really shoot people, right?" "Yeah, we know, but these are monsters. That's okay."
It's a demon. They were asking for it. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Also, thankfully, we weren't in a super religious household because my parents would see that it's like, "Oh no!" It's like, "Oh
Right.
no!" It's like they're next thing I know, I come in, they're saying, "You don't know what this is." They're trying to bless it or something.
It's funny because Blue grew up in more of a conservative household in that sense,
Mhm.
and she was only allowed 30 minutes worth of playtime a day, which I gotta say that must have been a rough childhood.
I,
But now I
I,
understand too why she
yeah,
plays so much. It's she's making up for lost time. It's,
I,
it's what I
I
look at.
I mean, if after a while, my parents did impose a time limit because when I was growing up, we were oh no, did you freeze?
I think I did. Can you still hear me
Okay.
though?
Oh yeah, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank goodness. Yeah. Audio listeners, you can't see this, but Ryan, unfortunately, his camera froze, but thankfully we could still hear him. So whew, we're safe there. It's probably gonna take a while to buffer. What was it saying? Yeah, yeah, because my parents they also put a restriction on how long my brother and I could play games. Like we had to set a timer.
Oh,
And
nice.
I feel like Blue said she got 30 minutes. I feel her pain because for a while my parents gave us an hour.
Got it.
And they wanted us to make sure that that hour started the second we turned the system on. But
Ah.
then something happened when we were trying to play Crash Bandicoot 3, and we had to and we were trying to skip the opening cutscene. For some reason, our start button wasn't working that way, or it maybe
Oh,
wasn't reading, so we couldn't skip the cutscene. And that was eating into a good 5 minutes of us being able to play the game. So we actually went up to our mom and said, "Hey, we can't skip this scene. Can we please start the timer when we hit start?" And there, or like when we get to the title screen. And at first they're like, "No, you're trying to get more time." It's like, no, this is what's happening. We had to prove to them that we're pushing the button, but it's not skipping. And then she's like, "Okay, fine. If it has a cutscene, if it has a little movie like that, you can turn the timer on afterwards." And then it went from an hour to an hour and a half to possibly 2 hours to, and
right.
then they just stopped caring.
But it sounds like you were, starting off in kind of the pseudo lawyer position there, where you're like presenting to the court, like, "Dear mom and dad, we would like to present to you this evidence that there was a 5-minute cutscene, and
Yep.
that we feel we deserve an additional 5 minutes to play."
We deserve to start our time once we get to the level select. And it worked. And hell, even my brother going into that pseudo lawyer thing, that's how my brother convinced me to put some of my Christmas money with him to buy our Game Boy Advance SPs. Because my
Right.
parents, they were very much into, you get the one console, that's it. We're not going to get you a upgrade version.
Mhm.
And of course, when the GBA SP came out, because I had a Game Boy Advance already. I was the only one with the Game Boy Advance. And of course, since I was the one who had it, if should my brother want to play it, I had to share. And when we saw advertisements for the SP, the fact that it had a backlit screen, that it was a rechargeable battery. We never had to go out and buy batteries anymore. We were like, we need that. But my parents were like, you already have a game. It's kind of like when you're driving home. It's like, Mom, I want McDonald's. We have McDonald's at home.
I can make you a cheeseburger. It's the same, I promise.
And it's like, but it's not though. So my brother came up to me one day and he had a typewriter for some reason. He just wanted a typewriter randomly and he just started clicking away. He wrote a freaking contract and he gave me a business pitch on why I should give some of my precious Christmas money, which wasn't, I mean, for me, it was like 70 some odd dollars, which when you're, oh God, how old was I? 11, 12, however young I was,
Mhm.
I feel like a damn millionaire. And he comes up to me and gives me the exact terms of how much he's going to contribute and how much we need to ask our parents to contribute. We go to my mom. I signed the damn contract because he convinced me. We go to my mom and she reads it over. We give her the pitch as well. She agrees, and 20 minutes later, we're at the Walmart buying our SPs.
I love that. That is such a cool story. That's fantastic.
It's my like going like we've actually convinced our mom to put, I think she had to like put up like an extra 50 or 40 some odd dollars because we were short,
Mhm.
and she just thought it was the coolest thing ever. Then when my dad came home, she told him the whole story. He showed him the contract and he's like, what, the boys did this?
So what I think you need to do is to add to your Twitter handle Ben Magnet Esquire, is because clearly you deserve that title, sir.
That's my
Fantastic.
that's mostly my younger brother. He was the one who
Hey,
thought that up. He was the one who wanted the SP, and he's like, I'm short. Maybe because he was like, he to get what he wanted, I also had to be on board. But at the same time, I got something else as well. So
right, right. It was definitely a win-win for sure.
it was definitely a win-win. But going back to talking about how Blue was stuck in on a time limit,
Mhm.
30 minutes. I don't think I would have survived, to be perfectly honest.
I think if
Uh,
you had an Atari, that would have been plenty of time, but NES
oh
and
yeah, yeah.
beyond, yeah.
And I would say NES and Beyond, maybe you'd be okay because you could like play 30 minutes. You could get past the super hard level, Super Mario
Sure.
Bros. Like because unfortunately, I have a little bit of a gamer confession, if I may,
Mhm.
Ryan. I have never beaten the original Super Mario Brothers.
I was in the same boat as you until probably 3 years ago.
Okay,
So
I'm
as far
glad
as
I'm not
things
the only
go,
one.
right, exactly. And you know what? I don't think, when I was a kid, I beat a lot of games. I could probably be a handful of games I actually beat. I just enjoyed playing them, seeing the
Hmm.
visuals and doing the stories. The one game I was very proud of as a kid to beat was Donkey Kong Country. I remember that specifically. Getting to King K. Rool and then seeing the credits, and then all of a sudden it says the end ? And then you got to continue the battle. That was fun. And as an adult, though, one of the things that I've done that I was so close to doing as a kid, just never really got there, was beating Mike Tyson and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. But recently I've remedied that, and now I can pretty consistently beat him just because I'm familiar with the patterns and what to do at certain times. But I remember as a kid getting to him and just being like, what is this? This is what a change and difficulty I'm running into here. Because I mean, Super Macho Man is tough. Don't get me wrong, but a one-shot knockdown for the first minute and 30 seconds of a round, that it just seemed so incredibly difficult and hard. I just remember being so incredibly frustrated. And then as an adult, when I beat him the first time, it was like, I can close this chapter in my life. I've done it. I feel comfortable. You know what? I'm going to have put that on my epitaph when I pass away, right? Just going to say
it's like,
007.
It's like, here lies Ryan Payne, a.k.a. Retro Game Brews, a.k.a. Professor Rye Bread. He finally beat Mike Tyson.
Exactly. And then just put the code 007,
Yeah. You just put the Mike Tyson Punch-Out code. I never grew up with Mike Tyson. Or by Mike Tyson, I mean Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And back in 2020, before the pandemic hit, me and my friends, we were out in Arizona for spring training because all of our favorite baseball teams play out there. Nice. And there's a microbrew called 8-Bit Ale Works, and it's my favorite microbrew in the entire world because it's all video game themed. They make their delicious adult beverages, and they also have a bunch of consoles set up so as you drink, you could play video games. And one of the games they had was, of course, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I had never really played Punch-Out. So right before we leave to go watch the Dodgers play, my buddy puts in the code to fight Mike Tyson. I get demolished. I don't think I last like a minute. I think I lasted 45 seconds against Mike Tyson, but because I've never played the game, I never really tried Punch-Out before. I mean, thankfully it's on the Mini, and the Super Punch-Out is on my Super Nintendo Mini. But Punch-Out was never one of those games that I was really into because I wasn't a big fan of boxing games. I like fighting games, don't get me wrong, but boxing games were just, the mechanics were a little bit different that I didn't really understand it, or I didn't think I was going to like. Thankfully, I do, because I really enjoy playing a Super Punch-Out, and I want to give Punch-Out another go. But just the fact that Mike Tyson just like knocked me out in 2 punches, I'm just sitting there going, huh.
How about that?
How about that? And of course, my friend who punched in the code, who had the damn thing memorized, he's like laughing. He's taking pictures like, this man got utterly demolished. I'm like, yeah, yes, I did. I will not shy away from the fact that I got utterly destroyed.
And my love for Punch-Out though really started because I begged and begged and begged my parents to pick me up a Power Glove as a kid. So they ended up doing that, which was awesome. When I opened it, because I was very excited to play it. And so I spent hours trying to get as far as I could with the Power Glove. And actually, if I remember right, I did fairly well. I got past the first Piston Honda, and I think I got past King Hippo. But after that, I don't think that the Power Glove was really up to snuff to get there. So finally, take it off and holding it like it's a controller and playing through it after that. But because there was the motion portion of it, there was this love for the game. There's so much nostalgia for me as well. I would love to someday strap on the Power Glove, because I ended up picking one up a few years ago and giving it a go again. See if I can get as far as possible. The last time I played it, I actually brought it over to a friend's house in New York, and we tried to play a bunch of games on this thing. And yeah, it was more funny than it was anything else. Because it doesn't work very well.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, no. But it looks really, really cool. So there. Yeah, it's just an interesting piece, kind of from a nostalgia perspective, for sure.
Yeah, I have a weird fascination with the Power Glove. I've never seen The Wizard. That's definitely one of those movies where I want to watch it just because I only know about it through osmosis. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this stupid clip of, I love the Power Glove. It's so bad. And I always had like this weird fascination with the Power Glove and
Mhm.
how I've never tried one on. I just want to try it on the Power Glove, take a picture just once in my life. I if I ever own a Power Glove, it's just gonna be for some weird cosplay thing.
Oh
Because
yeah.
my friends on the Fake Nerd the cosplay, my friends on Fake Nerd podcast, the main podcast I'm a part of, they call me Nostalgia's bitch. They're not wrong, unfortunately. And even though I never grew up with the Power Glove, I know that I somewhat know the history of the Power Glove. I know the Power Glove is supposed to be like was the first step in making this grand, like, oh, video games can be more than that. Virtual reality, ooh, the
Right.
stuff you see in science fiction novels and Star Trek. But I just want to wear the Power Glove, and for some reason, even though I have a replica Infinity Gauntlet downstairs, if
Mhm.
I were to ever hold on the Power Glove, I'd be like, perfectly balanced, like all things. I will feel like Thanos. I don't care.
You know what? I there's got to be somebody out there that's turned a Power Glove into Infinity Gauntlet,
They
and
did. I saw a picture of it on Twitter the other day. It looks
God,
so freaking cool.
I love the internet.
There are
That is
times
so
I
fun.
hate the internet, and there are times I love the internet, and
Right.
this is one of those times I love the internet.
Yes, for sure. That's funny.
But yeah, I just want to hold up, just want to wear a Power Glove. I just want to take, like, one time, I want to say I was at SoCal Gaming Expo. This was last year. And there was like this small little video game museum that was that was doing a little travel thing, and
Mhm.
they had a Power Glove, and I asked if I could try it on, and they said they looked at me all weird. It's like, why do you want to try on the Power Glove? And I'm trying to tell them, it's like, look, I know it's stupid. I just want to try it on. I just want to take a picture of me wearing it. Is there any way I can do that? And they're like, no. And I
That's one of those like throwing a soundbite. Da, 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 da,
burn.
brr.
I could already hear Donnie and Blue making some other joke of that. It's like when you guys listen to this, I could already hear the jokes. I know.
And you know what? At the end of the day, I think the one problem that you run into lately with the Power Glove as well is that it's hard to find one that works, and that's
Yeah,
the biggest disappointment for me. Because there
yeah.
were times I was hunting for it because I definitely wanted to kind of relive that nostalgia factor from a kid, for being a kid, and going out there trying to find a working one that still had the sensors and still had the
Mhm.
hookups and everything. That was exceedingly difficult. And I just
Yeah.
so happened to have found one on Craigslist with
Ooh.
somebody who kind of didn't know what they had too, which was
Mhm.
fantastic. Uh, they referred to it as Nintendo glove, which cool, that
They're
works.
not wrong. They are not wrong.
And so, yeah, I went over and I go, "It works, right?" And they're like, I think so." Okay, sure. So brought it home with the understanding I was paying considerably less than it was probably worth, with
Mhm.
the obvious fear or risk that it wouldn't work. And turned it on, and sure enough, it started lighting up on me. I was like, "Oh my goodness, please, please!" Walked in and plugged in Mike Tyson's Punch Out and knocked out Glass Joe. Within the first 42 seconds, I was like, yes, this thing finally works. Fantastic. So, uh, got that. And I probably haven't really touched it since then, since, obviously we did the stream. So maybe that's something now you're, fueling this fire in me to play it again. So, that might happen pretty soon. So
That
thank you.
that
Thank you for
th
that.
You are very much welcome. I mean, if you and I ever meet face to face, and like say I'm in New York somewhere, and then we're somewhere where you have the Power Glove, I'm
Mhm.
trying it on.
Oh, I'm bringing it with me anytime I go now.
I just want to try this on. I just want to get the picture of it. I don't even care if I get like, say down the line, I'm at like say a PRGE or another video game convention here in California, and someone is selling a Power Glove, like a broken Power Glove, for much less than, I don't care if it doesn't work because I still have my original NES. I haven't plugged it in yet. I plan to turn that into like a little museum piece,
Nice.
because I have my mini, and I could also get a clone console for the cartridges should I want to play them.
Right.
Um, I just want a Power Glove because I think it's fun. I think it's a dumb thing. It's like the Wizard. I haven't seen the Wizard. I would love to watch the Wizard, but I know what the Power Glove is. I know it was something. It tried to be something that the technology wasn't there for yet, but I don't care if it's broken. I just want to wear it because I think it's cool. because
And
I just think
I'm in the
it's a cool
same
thing.
boat though as you, where I just want to have something to just have it sometimes. You know, I
Yeah.
don't care if it's, you know, like the most pristine copy of something or what have you. For example, Donnie was showing me pictures from I think it was PRGE, and there there was a copy of the Mystique Atari 2600 game that is very adult themed, is what I'll call it,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And goes by the name of Beat 'em and Eat 'em, and it
I
was
remember you.
sealed. Yes, it was sealed. So clearly, I'm not going to do anything with. I just wanted to have it. It was kind
Yeah.
of something like as a conversation piece. People come over and go, "What's that?" I'm like, "Oh, let me tell you the history of Atari adult games." So you know, that's I totally get that mentality. I think it's okay to want something just to want it. And you know what? Again, it's about creating some conversation about the things that happened back in the day, and you know, allowing people to understand where video games came from. So
Yeah.
it's that conversation piece that will hopefully either bore somebody to death or really get them excited about the history of video
Hmm.
games. So
Yeah, and even when you were talking about how you found your Power Glove
mhm.
for a very decent price, it reminded me because we both had Patrick Brickhouse. He's a friend of my show. He's a friend of yours, obviously, of the Retro Blast podcast. And when he told me his story of how he got his CIB Game Boy for $20 off of
Wow.
Facebook Marketplace, it makes me mad. Not that he got it for a really cheap price. I am stupid happy that he was able to get it. But the fact that I live in Southern California and people actually know their shit,
Right.
or they
Right.
at least have a decent idea of how much things are worth over here, it's like, damn it, why can't I get deals like that out here?
And you know, Donnie lives in St. Louis, and that seems to be an area where there's a lot of nostalgia available to him, including toys and video games that people don't seem to know how much they're worth. So he's getting these crazy deals. Here, where I'm living in Atlanta, Georgia, everybody knows how much it's worth. And more than likely, if it's on Facebook Marketplace, it's for twice the value that it would go
Yeah.
on eBay for. So I look at Facebook Marketplace every day, and it's every day I'm most likely going to be disappointed. 99 times out of 100, I'm going to be disappointed. The only thing that I've been able to pick up recently was a a Dreamcast that was a Sega Sports Dreamcast,
The black
but
one?
the black one, yep. But
Nice.
I had to drive out of my way to get it. So it was about an hour and 10 minutes. It was like northwest of Atlanta in order to get there.
Ooh.
And at the time I found it while my in-laws were in town. And so I said to my father-in-law, like, hey, want to go for a drive? He's like, sure, where are we going? I was like, I'll let you know when we get there. And we pull up to this Walmart that's in the middle of nowhere, and this pickup truck gets out, and there's probably 6 kids in the back of the pickup truck.
Oh
And
no.
yeah, so
Oh
yeah,
no.
one of them jumps out with like, you know, a plastic bag with all the stuff in it, and hands it to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, good. This interaction went better than I expected when they pulled up, but yeah.
Did you hand him did you hand the kid the money?
Yes, so I'm like, yeah. It was
Your
that awkward
father-in-law,
handoff.
I can only imagine, because I'm just going to assume that your father-in-law has no idea, isn't really much of a video gamer
No,
himself.
no.
Yeah, I can only imagine that you're doing a drug deal.
Right, exactly. It's like, what's in the bag, Ryan?
Take a look. What's this black box? That's a Sega. That's a Sega Sports Sega Dreamcast. What's a Sega Dreamcast?
You know what's funny though is that my mother-in-law loves coming over our house because I've got a arcade one-up countertop of Miss Pac-Man and Pac-Man, and she will play that day in and day out when she comes over. She has the high score on my machine. She is amazing at that game, and I will wake up in the morning because what I do when she comes over is I put it down in the kitchen at like kind of the breakfast area. I'll wake up and it'll be 6 o'clock in the morning, getting ready for work, and she's been on that thing for hours already. You know, sipping her coffee, going to town on Miss Pac-Man. So it's funny, you know. My parents weren't really that big into it, but she just loves Miss Pac-Man. So we get a chance to kind of chit chat about that. So it's fun. I love it.
That's awesome.
Hmm.
I mean, I would definitely. That would. I remember, because the fact that your mother-in-law has a high score on your own machine,
Right.
that would definitely like light a fire on my, like, if my parents don't really play video games, but if my mom, because I don't own any arcade 1-up stuff yet. If I were to have like an arcade 1-up and my mom was the one who just set the high score on my Pac-Man or my Galaga or whatever,
Mhm.
I'm playing that sucker to try and beat that damn high score.
Oh, I have. I've tried, and
Oh,
she is really, really good. She has like, I think what is it? It's over 100,000 points. She's
oh,
got on this thing. Yeah.
I went to an arcade yesterday and and they had a version of Miss Pac-Man where Miss Pac-Man was very quick. She was very sped up.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay. And I was getting farther than I've ever gotten in a Miss Pac-Man game, but in my entire life. Got to the red maze. I was eating the pretzel. I was
Nice.
like, man, this is the farthest I've ever gotten. And I look up and I'm thinking, man, I should, because this arcade every day they reset the high scores.
Right.
And I thought to myself, oh man, I should be up on the leaderboard. I'm nowhere close.
Man,
Just
such a disappointment. You know?
I think I got 60,000 points on my run, and I was very proud of myself. That was the
Sure.
best Miss Pac-Man. I mean, yeah, she was sped up to high heaven. It wasn't a normal Miss Pac-Man game, but at the same time, I'm like, man, I did pretty good for myself. I look at the high score, and it's like 100. It's like 200,000 points, and I'm sitting there over at like 60 grand, and I'm just sitting there going, well then,
How about that?
how about that? Just
Well,
like utterly defeated, but at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time, still trying to like hype myself. I was like, but you went farther than ever before. I was like, yeah, but didn't not even close though.
Right. And you know, I went to Southern Fried Gaming Expo with Donnie and our friend Crunchy Kong, and so we were there for a few days, and they had a versus duck hunt uh, machine, and
Uh-huh.
I was determined to get the high score on that, and so it was pretty high. It was I think it was like 250,000 points, which is a lot in versus duck hunt. So
Yeah.
going day after day, getting closer, getting closer, getting closer. I finally get to the point where I'm about to beat the high score. I'm only a few thousand points away, and they've got this enormous blow up of Mario. And the thing, for some reason or another, came unhooked from the toes that were keeping it to the ground, and it ends up falling over and hitting the power cord for all the Marc arcade machines in that row. And it stopped me in the middle of a really good run, but B, it erased all of the high scores. So I was so disappointed. And the eruption of all these people going, oh, as this thing all of a sudden turned off all the machines. And come to find out, it was this little kid that was playing around and trying to get a picture, and he like hit one of the lines that was tying it down.
Of
And so,
course.
of course, everybody's like staring at, and the dad who is standing next to this kid is just like, I'm so sorry. But yeah. I went back though. I went back and got higher than the original high score, but I couldn't show off that I had beaten a
Yeah.
decent high score. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was
But at least you set a good high score though.
right. Right.
At least you said it. And at the same time, when the second you tell me it was a little kid playing around with the Mario, part of
Mhm.
me just goes, But the exact same time, something I've been noticing, especially when I went to PRGE, and we have a few conventions and a few things here in California that we can go to that are retro video game oriented, that are retro arcades. There are still a few peppered around in the Southland.
Mhm.
Adults bring parents bring their kids, and these are small kids too. And I've even seen grandparents bring their grandkids,
Love that.
and that there's like these, and that these the younger generation, the very youngest generation now who are playing video games, it's not, to them it's not just about PlayStation, Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch. Granted, they still have those at home, and of course I have mine at home. I don't take, you can pry my PS5 out of my cold dead hands first. But the fact that the younger generation, they're coming to see, and they're coming to these conventions, they're going to these arcades, and they're playing games and they're having fun. And their parents are saying, it's like, I remember playing this when I was your age.
Right.
And the fact that the kids aren't complaining about it, I mean, they might say something that's like, wow, this doesn't look anything like Fortnite, but they're playing is like, yo, this is actually really fun. Or when I see pictures of parents, there's this one picture I saw, I want to say it was either on Instagram or Twitter, where it was his son and three of his friends. He busted out his Super Nintendo with the multi-tap, plugged in Turtles in Time. All four of them were playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time
Love it.
on the Super Nintendo, and they were getting to they were like at the second to last stage, I think.
Yep.
And the caption read, "This has never made me happier as a parent that my youngest
Aw.
son is playing Turtles in Time with his friends." It was a flashback of what he did in the 90s with his friends.
And to that point, I think that this younger generation has found these games to be as entertaining as we found them, and that's the beauty of all of this. And in fact, it's created an interesting kind of side, community of younger kids that are really interested in retro, and especially when it
Mhm.
comes to things like esports. The best players in the world when it comes to Tetris nowadays are younger than 16 years old. They are getting
Yo.
involved with it. So I mean, if you look at PRGE every year, they have the championships, world
Oh,
championships for Tetris.
oh no, I saw.
Oh yeah,
I
and
saw some of that. I consider myself a decent player of Tetris.
mhm.
I'm okay at Tetris. I love Tetris. Tetris is one of those games that I will never get tired of. I don't know how many times I bought different copies of Tetris. A new thing of Tetris comes out, I'm probably gonna buy it. But seeing these people at the classic Tetris World Championships at PRGE, what they're doing, how they're holding the D-pad,
Mhm.
I'm just sitting there going, nope, nope, out of my league, out of my league. I am utter garbage compared to these guys.
And the crazy part is the progression of that holding the controller in a specific way has really changed over the years. So when Classic Tetris World Championship started off in kind of the late or early 2010s, it was this process called DAS, which means that you specifically hold the D-pad in one direction or another before the
Mhm.
piece drops to try to get it from one side to the other. The problem with that is that when you're working at really high levels, the speed is so great that sometimes you're going to miss. So the progression came into what they call hyper tapping, which was pressing the D-pad, you know, tens of times a second in order to get the piece over. And now it's called rolling, where you tap the bottom of the controller with your fingers and kind of roll your fingers across it like you're tapping and letting somebody know that you're impatient. And as a result of that, you can get more button presses in. And now that whole entire progression has made it so that it's a lot easier for players to play at a high level because it doesn't require an understanding of how DES works or how hyper tapping works. And the fact that that is all still alive and well today is just such a testament to how great that game is or was and still is when it comes to Tetris.
No
And
wonder these people keep
yeah.
beating me at Tetris 99. Seriously, I've never gotten Tetris Maximus in Tetris 99. I haven't. It's been a while since I last played Tetris 99,
Mhm,
but when that first came out, I loved that concept. I thought Tetris 99 was a great idea.
mhm.
It was a perfect way to get to have people play classic Tetris again, or at least make Tetris even more competitive than it already can be with the classic Tetris World Championships. But the highest I've ever gotten was third place, and that makes me mad.
Highest I ever got was second. So I was
Ah,
very, very upset because I was doing well. It was that, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm going to do this. And
me
then
too.
boom, all of a sudden my entire, screen raises up and it's like, oh no.
I mean, you get to that point, and all of a sudden you're like, you're doing great, and all of a sudden it just like rises up, and you're just like, how? Just how does that happen? I think I also got second too. I think I've gotten second as well, but I definitely know that I've had amazing runs in Tetris,
Mhm.
or at least in Tetris 99, and I just constantly just can't get that Tetris Maximus. When Pac-Man 99 came out, I'm like, I don't know, but then it's like I got the Pac-Man. I've gotten the first place a few times in Pac-Man, so I'm like, okay, at least I can say I've gotten first place
Right.
there. But then I look over to Tetris, and I'm like, why do you torture me so?
Kind of bring it back to that with this younger generation idea. I think what's cool about it too is the fact that there is so many opportunities for them to also learn about the history of video games
Mhm. Oh
nowadays.
yeah.
And these kids are getting exposure to these arcade games at places like PRGE and all the different comms like Midwest Gaming Classic and Too Many Games, which is great because right now if you look at arcades, if you go into your average roller rink or Dave and Buster's, it's all ticket games nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And while those are fun, I have a blast with them. The problem with those is that often they're rigged, so
Yeah.
they want you to put your money into it. And
Yep.
two, it just doesn't capture the same magic. I think that Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, even some of the stuff that was in the '90s, like House of Dead 2, and all those games that I ended up playing by going to your local cinema Now those kids have access to those things in an environment that's similar to how we experienced them, where it was crowds of people around. There's a lot of noise and kind of it's a cacophony, but everybody's there to have fun. And, so I just love that concept. I think that overall that keeps this hobby alive, especially when we're
Yeah.
talking about the retro scene.
Oh yeah, 100%. And even now that I'm an adult, because when I was a kid, I would love to go to ticket machines. I would love going to
Oh
Chuck E. Cheese. But even when I was at Chuck E. Cheese, constantly remember playing the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game.
Love it.
And I could barely, and we can never get past the first boss, which I want to say is Bebop, if my memory serves.
It is
Yeah,
where the fire is all around you in the
yeah, and
apartment.
I could not beat that stage when I was a kid. And of course, I'm always going to my dad to beg for money for more tokens. And he's like, oh, no. Or even playing the original Jurassic Park arcade, not the one where the Lost World, the original Jurassic Park one, where you have the two sticks and there's a crosshair and you have to shoot the dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
We loved that game. And I want to say I was listening to the most recent episode of Gamers Week, where you had someone talk about like the pachinko style TMNT game where you drop a ball on the top and it goes plink, plink, plink. That I was like, I remember that game. I loved that game. I didn't know what, but then I see what a pachinko machine is. I'm like, oh, that's just like the Teenage Mutant the Turtles game over at Chuck E. Cheese. Gambling? What?
I got an interesting history with pachinko. My dad went to Japan in the mid 90s and brought back a pachinko machine for us to have at the house.
What?
And yeah, I played that pachinko machine so much that I wore out the gears on the handle, and my dad had to order off from a Japanese manufacturer to get the replacement parts for it. But to this day, in my dad's basement, you can find the little ball bearings somewhere. If you look hard enough, they're under a piece of furniture, or they're even under the carpet at some points.
Oh my God. That is, I mean, I just recently, I went to Laughlin, Nevada recently. It's kind of like a Vegas Junior, or
I lived in Vegas for about 18 months. So I'm
okay.
Very familiar with Laughlin for sure.
All right, awesome. So you know what Laughlin is, yeah? Because my girlfriend, she's never been, and when we're going through the casino of Laughlin, and I see a bunch of Konami slot machines, I'm like, I kind of give them the side eye a little bit. Because I know Konami, they're just making a bunch of. I mean, thankfully now they're doing a little bit better with their actual video games division. But I see these slot machines. I know about the bajillion and a half pachinko machines over in Japan that Konami has made and developed, and I'm just kind of like giving them the side eye. It's like, you guys made Castlevania, you sons of bitches.
You're better than this, guys. You're better.
Yeah, it's like, you're better than this, damn it. But it was, I will not lie. I was even telling my girlfriend about how I was like, oh, hey, Konami. She's like, wait, Konami, I know that name. And I was like, yeah, this is what they've been doing for the past X amount of years. They've just been making slot machines and pachinko machines because that's where the money is for them.
Right.
Not just, I mean, they are a business. I can't give them too much crap because it's a slot machine. You people get money from slot machine, or the makers in the house, they get money from slot machines. But still, it's just knowing what Konami's history is with Metal Gear, Silent Hill, Castlevania, and of course them making those classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade games, them developing the games of the Ninja Turtle games that we've all known and loved. Thankfully, they're on the Cowabunga collection, and just seeing them resort to only making these slot machines, it kind of hurts my heart a little bit, but still, that's life, I guess.
Yeah, it's the same with Sega Sammy. Their biggest biggest focus is pachinko as well. But thankfully enough, Sega has kind of found their way back a little bit. Now, making a 3-inch Game Gear for you to play, not exactly the route I wanted them to go, but nonetheless, Sonic is
just make a regular make a regular size Game Gear, put a bunch of games on it, make it chargeable. Because I mean, I bought this the Mario Brothers Game and Watch because it was a little nostalgia trap, but it has rechargeable battery, color screen, and all that great things. I'm like, hey, this is a good idea. And then I saw the Game Gear minis. I'm like, but they're so small.
The Game Boy Micro was okay.
Yeah.
I get that, but it was,
Yeah.
it was something you could plug other games into and play. It wasn't just, kind of plug and play, not kind of,
Yeah.
but just like a little emulation machine with 4 games on it. Come on, you can do
Yeah.
so much better than that.
Just like at that point, just make a full size Game Gear with like half the Game Gear because the Game Gear games aren't that big, and
Right.
a good chunk of them are Sonic games. You could just like, if you want to make different versions, just make a Sonic Blue one and a not Sonic Blue one, and then boy, look at me, I'm giving you money already.
Oh, I would be all over that too, and I would play it all
Oh
the
yeah,
time for sure.
yeah. And also, guess what I got for Christmas this year?
But
A Genesis Mini 2.
nice. I ended up picking up a Mega Drive Tower Mini 2, thinking that it was a Sega Genesis CD plug and play. And come to find out, it is just a decoration. So,
I seriously think that Sega missed a huge market
oh
where
my
they could.
goodness.
I mean, okay, this is kind of going back to what Sega did in the 90s with the CD and the 32X. But if they had made those compatible with the Genesis or with the Genesis Mini 2, and you actually just like maybe daisy chain like with a power, or just like do something with have like an adapter for the power supply
Mhm.
and just attach it, have like an actual port where you can just plug it in. And then, oh, you have access to this selection of CD games. Oh, you have the 32X. Here's all of them. You have access to all these games. That would have been so worth it
Oh, absolutely.
instead of just having them as like decorations. You can only play Genesis games, because one of the problems I have with Sega, don't get me wrong, I do still love Sega, but they really need to stop holding on to the Genesis and the Genesis only.
Completely
I
agree.
cannot tell you how much I would love Sega Saturn games on the on the Nintendo Switch Online service, or a Sega Saturn Mini. I would, if Sega can take the faults that the PlayStation Classic had,
Mhm.
but make it and apply it to the Saturn, is like not take the faults, but take the lessons learned from the
Right.
PlayStation Mini and apply it to a Saturn Mini or even a Dreamcast Mini. That thing would sell gangbusters.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you talk about the Saturn, considering there's such a huge library of games that never made it outside of Japan.
Mhm.
Uh, Imagine the amount of people who would, wait in line to get access
Oh
to
yeah.
games. Even though, if you own a Saturn now, you can get one of those region unlock carts to plug in the back. It's something where it's difficult to import those games, and it's very expensive to do so. So,
Mhm.
even if they made it $100, I would be all in. Make one
Oh,
that's the regular gray, make one that's the Sega Sports, and go crazy with it. I would buy both of them.
or
Uh,
even it's like, hey, you can have like American versions of both. You can like access the Japanese and American versions, but it's like you can choose your color. You could have the original black. You could have
right.
the original gray.
Yep.
You could have the Sega Saturn white.
Yes.
I would love a white
Oh,
Sega Saturn.
please. Please.
Yeah, but I mean, who knows what they're gonna do? Hopefully, Sega will do something like that down the line, or at least put the games on the NSO. I would, I would be so happy if they were to put Saturn games on ESO, because Saturn games now are just so stupid expensive.
Oh, yeah.
I saw it wasn't even a CIB, it was a missing manual Panzer Dragoon for the Sega Saturn. It was in the box, it had the game, but the manual was missing. Do you know how much a video game store was selling that sucker for?
Tell me, and I know I'm gonna be disappointed.
150,
Jeez.
or either something
Without
along
the
that line.
manual too, right?
Without the manual, it was either
How
100 or 100.
how was
It was
the
still.
game case? Was it cracked as well?
It had some scuffs. It had some scuffs on it, but it wasn't like completely like destroyed. It was still a decent case. So you could tell this was taken on and off the shelf a lot,
Sure.
but still, like seeing games like that, and especially Saturn games, because I never saw when I went to PRG this last year. I never thought I would see a complete North American Sega Saturn collection until I saw it at PRG. There was a little Sega Saturn lounge, and I'm like, wow, what's with all the Saturn love? And being able to play Saturn games, because I never owned a Saturn. Saturn was one of those things that I knew it was Sega,
Mhm.
but I mean, unfortunately, if it did have Sonic on it, I didn't care. I was that kid, like with the Dream, because I thought it went from Genesis to Dreamcast, not Genesis, Saturn, then Dreamcast.
Gotcha.
Because I knew what I liked, and I liked Sonic the Hedgehog. There was no mainline Sonic game for the Saturn outside of Sonic R.
Mhm.
Even though that was also released on the PC, I played it on the PC. I played it on my Windows, and not the greatest game, to be perfectly honest.
I was just about to say that.
I mean, I personally like it because I have a deep connection to it,
Sure.
but other than that, it's not a good game. It's not that good. I can fully admit to Sonic R not being that good.
So, Ben, just a kind of a quick thing here. My wife just messaged me. She's not feeling too well, so she
All right,
actually,
yeah, we'll wrap this up. I have one more
yeah, I
question for you.
apologize.
It's all good.
Yep.
So and also we're heading on our time anyways.
Hmm.
So before you go, Ryan, I do have one quick question for you.
Hmm.
How important is it that other people learn video game history? Because I do think that video game history should there maybe it shouldn't be like part of the main curriculum. I still believe it should be elective. I think there's great lessons to be learned in video game history, but how important is it to you that other people should at least learn a little bit about video game history?
Well, I think especially if you're interested in getting into the gaming industry, having some perspective of how history has come along and the successes and potentially pitfalls of how gaming has progressed over the years, I think is always extremely, the idea that history repeats itself is very, very true. Even considering how short of a timeline we're really looking at here, because
Mhm.
obviously people are very much still alive that were involved back then. Uh, so yeah, there's definitely a part of that. The other part too is kind of holding on to this understanding of the video game progression over years. I think is also extremely important for people. It's we look at history from a political sense or from a military sense, and that looking at that as being an important thing for people to know. Video games, I think, fall into the same category. It's not exactly as groundbreaking as a war between two countries, but nonetheless, it's a great way for us to be able to chronicle how technology has progressed over the years and how we consume media and entertainment has changed and really hasn't changed over the years. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's extremely important, but not everybody is into history, so I can certainly understand that. But for those of us who are, I think it's an important piece
I mean,
to remember.
you were talking about how video game history isn't as is as big as a war between two nations, but at the same time, I don't know. I remember some very heated fights in the early '90s.
Oh yeah, the recess
Oh
back and
God.
forth, right? Yeah. Oh,
You
I
got a kid
remember that.
wearing a Nintendo shirt, you got a kid wearing a Sega shirt, and they're on the other side of the playground and they're just like standing there, arms crossed and yelling at each other, only to find out that they both liked the other guy's system
Oh
anyway.
yeah, for sure. Oh, 100%. Would never admit that, but yeah.
No, on the playground, never. Behind closed doors, oh hell yeah.
Blast processing, dude.
Oh God, I love that marketing tactic. But
Oh my
anyways,
goodness.
Ryan, thank you so much for coming on and chatting
Yeah.
with me about video game history. It's been an absolute blast. You have an open invite to come back on the show whenever you want.
Fantastic,
But
Ben. It's oh, go ahead.
no, no, before you go, where can people find you on the internet?
So for myself, I'm on Twitter. It's at Retro Game Brews, so I keep it pretty easy with that one. But if you're interested in finding a little bit more about our podcast, Gamers Week podcast, we're available on pretty much any app that you can download podcasts for. We also do have a Twitter account at Gamers Week PC. And if you are interested in supporting the show and getting involved with our kind of patron only community, we do have a Patreon. It's $5 a month, but it gives you access to a really cool Discord event as well, and a chance to really interact with a group of like-minded people. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely check it out. But it's patreon.com/gamersweek.
Yes, and of course, go ahead and listen to Gamers Week podcast. It's truly an amazing show. I absolutely love listening to you guys every week. It's one of my highlights when I get to
Aw.
listen to you guys on my drive to and from work. And yeah, so definitely go check right now. Check out the rest of the show, Gamers Week podcast. And of course, you can find me at BenMaga27, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Fake Nerd Podcast. You can find them all over the internet at fakenerdpodcast.com. That's the main hub. That's probably where you found this. So if you want to check out Fake Nerd's other shows, go to fakenerdpodcast.com. Links to our YouTube, Patreon. It's all there. And Ryan, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been an absolute blast.
Oh man, I've had so much fun, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
That would be great. And until next time, unpause.